Ferrari invented a rear wing that flips completely upside down on the straights. They call it the Macarena. It rotates the upper flap through 270 degrees, generating lift instead of downforce on the straights. And nothing like it has appeared on a Formula One car before. Red Bull just showed up at Silverstone with their own version. Their wing moves even further than Ferrari's. This is an arms race, and it is escalating fast. This story does not start with the history of active aerodynamics, or some long explanation of what DRS used to be. It starts with a rear wing flipping upside down in the Bahrain desert, and every team in the paddock scrambling to figure out what just happened. February 19th. Second week of pre-season testing at the Bahrain International Circuit, Lewis Hamilton rolls out of the Ferrari garage in the SF26, and on his very first run, the upper flap of his rear wing rotates completely over. Not a few degrees like old DRS, and not a gentle tilt. The entire element flips through roughly 270 degrees until it is sitting upside down, with the IBM sponsor logo inverted when viewed from behind. Hamilton completes 5 laps. Ferrari pulls the wing off and goes back to a conventional setup. The whole thing takes less than an hour. Oliver Behrman is driving behind Hamilton in the Haas when it happens. He later admits he thought the wing had physically broken. It looked like a mechanical failure, like the rear wing had torn itself apart at speed. It hadn't. Ferrari had just found something hiding inside the 2026 rulebook that nobody else had spotted. Charles Leclerc runs the wing briefly the following day as well, confirming this is not a one-off experiment. Ferrari is serious. Formula One's own social media team posts footage of the wing that same day under the caption, "You spin me right round." The clip spreads everywhere. Engineers from rival teams are screenshotting the footage and sending it to their aero departments. Within days, Williams team principal James Vowles publicly admits the concept had not come across their radar at any point during the design phase of their 2026 car. He calls it an interesting direction of travel, which, in team principal language, means they are kicking themselves for not thinking of it first. Fred Vasseur goes on French television that same week and coins the nickname himself, the Macarena, because the way the flap throws itself over looks like the arm movements from the 1996 dance hit. The name sticks instantly. The Macarena is different from anything else on the grid for one reason. Every other team in 2026 uses their rear wing flap, the same way teams have always used movable aerodynamics. The upper element tilts open a few degrees to create a gap. Air bleeds through, drag drops. It is the same basic idea as DRS, just without the proximity requirement. The regulations call it X mode for straights and Z mode for corners, and most teams treat the transition as a simple open and close. Ferrari is not doing that. When the SF26 hits a straight and the system activates, the upper flap does not just open, it rotates all the way over until the wing profile is inverted. Instead of pushing the rear of the car down, the flap is now shaped like a conventional aircraft wing, generating upward lift. That lift reduces the load on the rear tires, eases rolling resistance, and stalls the diffuser underneath the car. The combined effect is a massive drag cut that GPS data from Bahrain testing measured at roughly 10 km per hour of extra top speed. Think about what 10 extra km per hour means when you are fighting for position down a back straight. And the wing also opens a much larger effective slot gap than any conventional design achieves. When a normal team opens their flap a few degrees, you get a narrow slot for air to pass through. When Ferrari flips the entire element upside down, the gap between the main plane and where the flap used to sit is enormous. That is drag reduction on a completely different scale. Ferrari is also running the Macarena in combination with a secondary innovation near the exhaust, called the FTM, which directs exhaust gases underneath the inverted flap to help seal the rear end aerodynamically. The two systems are designed to work together, and the exhaust blowing effectively extends the influence of the diffuser, even while the rear wing is generating lift instead of downforce. There is also a braking benefit that almost nobody talks about. When the driver hits the brakes, and the wing rotates back to its closed position, it briefly passes through a fully vertical orientation. For a fraction of a second, the flap acts like a parachute, adding braking force before it settles back into downforce mode. The wing is working for the driver on acceleration, at top speed, and under braking. 3 jobs, 1 component, and that is where the problems start. The regulations require the transition between X mode and Z mode to complete in roughly 400 milliseconds. When you are only tilting a flap a few degrees, 400 milliseconds is generous. When you are spinning the flap through 270 degrees, 400 milliseconds is barely enough. And the front wing has to transition at exactly the same time, or the car loses aerodynamic balance. Ferrari finds out the hard way at the Chinese Grand Prix. They ship 3 different specification versions of the Macarena to Shanghai and bolt the wing onto both cars for the first practice session. Hamilton's rear flap takes too long to rotate back to Z mode under braking. The front wing has already returned to high downforce. The rear is still completing its arc, and the car is temporarily unloaded at the back. Hamilton spins under braking. Ferrari pulls the wing off both cars and does not use it for the rest of the weekend. They bring parts to Suzuka too, for the Japanese Grand Prix. Never fit them, the engineering team decides factory development is a better use of their time than troubleshooting at a racetrack. Then the calendar hands Ferrari an unexpected gift. The Bahrain and Saudi Arabian Grands Prix are cancelled, opening up a 5-week gap before Miami. That is 5 weeks of uninterrupted development time that nobody had planned for. Ferrari uses every day of it. On April 22nd, Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton run an updated version of the Macarena at a filming day in Monza. The wing looks different. There is a new central vertical element above the second flap, revised titanium halo winglets, and a new floor underneath the car. This is not the same wing that spun Hamilton in Shanghai. This is the Macarena 2.0, and on the exact same day, across Europe at Silverstone, Max Verstappen climbs into the RB22 with something very interesting bolted to the back of his car. If you are finding this useful, hit subscribe. I break down Formula 1 technical developments every week. Alright, so here is where things get really technical. Red Bull's filming day at Silverstone is not subtle. The RB22 that Verstappen takes onto the track looks like a different car. New front wing with a pointed mainplane and a dive plane feature on the end plate. Reshaped side pods with a new ridge on the shoulder. Small halo winglets that look suspiciously like the ones Ferrari debuted in China. And at the back, a rotating rear wing that follows the same philosophy as Ferrari's Macarena. The same philosophy as Ferrari, but a different execution. And in some ways, a more aggressive one. Ferrari hides the actuator mechanism inside the end plate fences at either end of the rear wing. It is clean, compact, and tucked out of the airflow. Red Bull keeps the actuator in a central pod on top of the wing, similar to where the old DRS actuator used to sit. That sounds like a simpler solution, and in some ways it is. The central location gives more mechanical leverage. The real difference is at the outboard ends of the upper flaps. Red Bull has added small sliding extenders on the pivot points at each side of the wing. These extenders widen the arc that the flap can travel through, giving the wing a larger range of angular motion than Ferrari's design achieves. The easiest way to picture the difference is this. Ferrari's wing rolls over cylindrically, like a rolling pin turning on a table. Red Bull's wing opens more like an umbrella, with the sliding endpoints allowing the flap to sweep through a wider path. And Red Bull's flap rotates in the opposite direction to Ferrari's. Where Ferrari's upper element rolls forward and over, Red Bull's pushes backward. The aerodynamic goal is the same, generating lift and stalling the diffuser on the straights. But the kinematics are fundamentally different. Why does Red Bull need to go this aggressive? Because they are desperate. 16 points in 3 races. 4th fastest team on the grid. Laurent Mekies, the team principal, has openly called Miami a second season launch. That is not the language of confidence. That is the language of a team that knows its car does not work and has to throw everything at the wall before the season slips away completely. The rotating wing is only part of what Red Bull tested at Silverstone. The new front wing features a pointed mainplane shape and a dive plane on the end plate, designed to generate a vortex that seals the floor edge. The side pods have been reshaped with a more aggressive shoulder ridge. Even the small halo winglets are new, clearly inspired by the ones Ferrari ran in Shanghai. This is not a single upgrade. Red Bull is shifting the entire concept of the car. Red Bull is looking at what the faster teams are doing and absorbing their ideas wholesale. The paddock estimates put the combined straight-line benefit of Red Bull's full Silverstone package at somewhere between 5 and 10 kilometers per hour. If that number holds up in race conditions, it could move them from 4th to 2nd fastest on power circuits. If it does not hold up, Miami is going to be a very long weekend. The FIA has already cleared the concept. Nicholas Tombazis, the governing body's single-seater technical director, reviewed the Macarena design at Maranello and declared it legal. His reasoning is straightforward. The 2026 regulations deliberately removed the old DRS restrictions on how far the rear wing flap could open. The rules specify permitted rotation angles and force limits and mounting envelopes, but they do not dictate where the pivot sits or which direction the wing faces when deployed. Ferrari found the gap. Red Bull drove through it. Not everyone was happy about that. McLaren's chief designer Rob Marshall admitted his first reaction was to question whether the concept was even legal. McLaren raised the issue with the FIA and ultimately accepted the clearance. But Marshall pointed out something interesting. The 2026 rulebook, despite being built around complex CAD reference volumes that look extremely prescriptive on paper, has actually allowed a wider variety of aerodynamic interpretations than anyone in the paddock expected. And Ferrari and Red Bull are not the only teams rethinking their rear wings. Alpine runs a design where the flap opens downward instead of upward, with the actuator lowering the trailing edge rather than raising the leading edge. It is a completely different kinematic solution to the same drag problem. Audi originally tried placing the pivot in the center of both flaps, so they rotated together as a single unit, then abandoned that approach and switched to an Alpine-style downward opening design before the season started. That is two completely different philosophies, tried and discarded by one team before a wheel had even turned in anger. Williams has publicly acknowledged the rotating concept never crossed their radar during the design phase and is now evaluating whether to follow. Haas, which shares transmission technology with Ferrari and therefore has the most natural path to copying the Macarena architecture, reportedly ran their own version of the wing concept at the Chinese Grand Prix, though the exact specification of what Haas tested is still unclear. Mercedes, meanwhile, is sticking with a more conventional flap opening approach on the rear wing. Their controversy this season sits at the other end of the car, involving a two-phase front wing actuator movement and a compression ratio engine trick that generated its own legality debate. So, the grid is splitting into distinct camps: teams that flip the wing, teams that drop the wing, and teams that simply open it. Three different philosophies, all legal under the same set of regulations. That is what happens when a rulebook gives engineers room to think. The 2026 regulations exist because of a fundamental problem that Formula One needed to solve. The old DRS system was proximity dependent. You could only open your rear flap within 1 second of the car ahead on designated straights. The new rules abolish that entirely. Active aerodynamics now operate on both front and rear wings, available to every driver on every designated straight, regardless of track position. A separate system called manual override, which provides an electric power boost, handles the overtaking function that DRS used to fill. The result is that every team is now free to find the most efficient way to transition between high downforce in the corners and low drag on the straights. The rules say the car needs two states. They do not say how you get between them. Ferrari looked at that freedom and asked a question nobody else asked. What if the wing does not just open? What if it turns completely over? The answer is the Macarena. And Red Bull looked at the Macarena and asked their own question: what if it turns even further? Both teams are expected to race their rotating wings for the first time at the Miami Grand Prix on May 3rd. Neither has run the design in a competitive session since Ferrari pulled it from the SF26 after that practice spin in Shanghai. Everything that has happened since the Monza filming day, the Silverstone filming day, the updated specifications, has been testing and preparation. The gap from China to Miami is almost 2 months. That is an enormous amount of development time for two of the most well-resourced teams on the grid. Ferrari has had time to solve the synchronization problem between front and rear wing transitions that caused Hamilton's spin. Red Bull has had time to validate whether their wider motion design actually delivers the aerodynamic gains the simulations promise. Whether either wing actually makes it onto the grid in Miami remains an open question. Filming days are limited to 200 kilometers on demonstration tires and are officially not performance tests. The conditions at Silverstone and Monza do not replicate the heat, humidity, and circuit characteristics of Miami. There is still a gap between bolting a wing to a car for a camera run and trusting it at 330 km/h wheel to wheel in a race. And if the synchronization problem that caused Hamilton's spin in Shanghai has not been completely solved, running the Macarena in a race could be worse than not running it at all. What is not in question is where this is heading. The Macarena concept works. The FIA has confirmed it is legal. Red Bull has proven that other teams can not only copy it, but extend it. And engineers across the paddock are already speculating about what a second-generation version of this wing looks like by the time the European leg of the season starts. Fred Vassar called it the Macarena because it looked like a dance. At Silverstone, Red Bull started doing the same dance, just with bigger moves. Miami is 8 days away, and for the first time this season, we are about to find out whether the wing that flips upside down is the wing that wins races.